Hello, friends. Welcome to the ATC Double Cut. In this episode, we have a guest joining us from the UK. It is Mr. Geoff Fenn, Technical Key Account Manager at Origin Amenity Solutions. Welcome to the show, Geoff.
Thank you, Micah. Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Looking forward to it.
I am too. We have had some email correspondences, some very interesting email correspondences over the past few years about topics such as the turfgrass growth potential and optimum temperatures for the turfgrass growth potential and clipping volume and the use of clipping volume, especially in the UK, well, and also worldwide, and how much grass grows around the world. And I thought, I would like to know how people are using GP, how people are using clipping volume in the UK. And I thought, let's have a discussion about it and share it with the world.
Yeah. So, I guess my interest in clipping volume and GP comes from my time as a golf course manager, really. I spent 13 years as a golf course manager, and I guess without really having the formal thoughts of what, the GP and the clipping volume, I was always kind of striving to achieve the best possible outcomes from the minimum effort, I suppose. I used to have an agronomist come round and visit me, and he would always say, I need to apply this amount of top dressing to get my greens up to performing as best as they possibly can. And I couldn't get that much sand into my greens, and it came to the point where the agronomist was saying, well, you need to apply more fertilizer to get this sand in. And I thought, this doesn't seem right. So I think even probably 15, 20 years ago, I had these thoughts going through my head that maybe we could be doing things better here rather than just putting a lot of fertilizer on, building thatch, and then removing it and putting sand in there. So when I first started to see, I guess it was from you, the things about clipping volume and MLSN and using growth potential to understand these things, that kind of really clicked with me. So I bought into it quite easily, really. And I know that's a lot of people don't. But for me, it was quite natural, and I kind of grabbed hold of that straight away and thought, yeah, this makes a lot of sense to me. And very little over the last probably 10, 15 years has changed my opinion that this is a really, really important tool, for greenkeepers around the world.
That's interesting to hear that it clicked for you. Somebody else, I think, who's described it in a similar way is Jason Haynes, who I know you've met Jason Haynes.
Yeah.
And I know when he first heard about MLSN, which is a way for applying nutrients, when he first heard about that, he became an early adopter of that because it just made sense to him. And I think he's described previously as trying to hit these annual targets of put down this much fertilizer. And MLSN is more like, let's match to what the grass is actually using.
Exactly, yes.
And then when that just clicks, once it clicks, it's like, of course it's that way. It's just sort of like eating. We should eat the amount.
If we're to look back, isn't it?
Yeah.
Once you get to that point, you think, well, what was I doing before? It doesn't make any sense now. But
now,
that's life. You learn and move forward, don't you?
Where were you a course manager?
So I was in Bedfordshire. So I was at Bedford and County Golf Club. I was there for quite a few years. While I was there working full time, I did part time my turfgrass science degree, and I think that was sort of what kicked it off for me. You start to kind of think. You critically analyze things, I think, a lot better once you kind of get that scientific kind of bit into your head. So I remember doing a project then where I was looking at non-pesticidal ways of dealing with microdochium. So the three ways that were kind of most commonly recommended at the time were iron, phosphite, and potassium. So I did a kind of a lit review on those three things. In iron, yes, absolutely, there's the evidence for it. Phosphite, again, there it is. And potassium, ooh, where's this come from? So that kind of got me thinking, why, you then start to mistrust everything you read, and you look at everything and think, is this right? And the whole potassium thing was something that kind of I grabbed hold of straight away. And when I moved into the commercial side, I did quite a few presentations where I didn't say potassium was bad, but I suggested that we were highly likely to be over applying it, and are we seeing the benefits from it that we are being sold? And it was interesting actually. I heard you doing one of these with uh, Tiny. You were talking with John Wall.
I I have done with a talk with John Wall.
Yeah, and I think you were talking about how people kind of see you as, oh, you're pushing MLS in. You just want us to under apply our nutrients and make our turf poor. And I think I kind of got a bit of a reputation as someone who hated potassium. And someone said that to me once. Oh, you hate potassium. I was like, well, no, I don't hate potassium. That would be weird, hating an element of the periodic table. I'm just saying, do we need to be applying, this amount of potassium? So, I spoke about that, and I can remember speaking about clipping volume in a talk at Harrogate would have been 2015, yeah, 10 years ago now, and nobody cared, to be perfectly honest. And I spoke about it quite passionately, but no one was really, no one
So
really took that on board. So it's interesting to see now it does seem to be starting to gain a bit of momentum, and MLSN is gaining a bit of momentum. So yeah, it does take people time, I think, doesn't it, to break from their kind of traditional thinking.
it certainly does. It takes quite a while, and when I was younger, I used to anticipate that things would change faster, and then as I get older, I realize that there's a lot of inertia, and it takes a long time for things to change. Well, in this episode, let's start off as we do on the ATC Double Cut with a blog post. We'll look at a blog post from the ATC website and use that to kick off the discussion. And this post that I've brought up on my screen, and I'll put a direct link to this in the show notes for everyone to check it out. It's an old classic post about growth potential. Originally, this would have been a 2014 or 2015 era post. It has a title, A Number Between 0 and 1 Using the Turfgrass Growth Potential. And this is something that is pretty easy for most people to understand, which is that when it's too cold or too hot for the grass to grow, it's not going to grow very much. And when the temperatures are ideal for the grass to grow, then it has the potential to grow at its optimum rate. Now, of course, there's other things that affect how much it actually will grow. Those things are light. Primarily, it's water, and it's light, and it is the nutrient status, really the nitrogen status of the plant. That's going to control, in addition to the temperature, how much it will grow. But assuming that it's got plenty of nitrogen, plenty of water, and plenty of light, then the grass is going to grow according to temperature. And what growth potential does is it converts temperature to a type of it converts temperature to a number. It's a function. It's a utility function that takes temperature and it converts it to a function. So I've shown here a solid black line, Geoff, that is around 0 for growth potential when the temperature is close to 0. And as the temperature approaches an optimum temperature for growth, which is around 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit, the growth potential goes to 1. And if we want to express that in percentage terms, we'd multiply it by 100. So it goes from 0 to 1 or from 0 to 100%. And that's what we have for cool season grass. And some of our earliest conversations were about this and about the optimum temperature.
There's that 20 number.
It's that 20 number. And so I know that a lot of people in the UK are using a UK GP where they use a optimum temperature of 18 degrees. And would you say that that's the standard in the UK?
Well, the GP was really first introduced to greenkeepers in the UK by Mark Hunt. He was the first one to really talk about it in depth, and he, being a student of the weather, as I'm sure we all know, he came up with the adjusted optimum temperature of 18 degrees, which, I've done a little work looking at clipping volume and comparing it with GP numbers, and Yeah, he was probably right, to be honest. I think 18 is probably more realistic for a lot of the grass types and the situations we're managing in the UK. So that's what people are familiar with, and it wasn't described as an adjusted GP in any way. It was just like, well, this is more suitable for the UK, so we are going to use this as our GP. Um, I I don't disagree with what he's done at all. But I know it's something you've spoken about before. It's nice to have that international standard language we can all use. So there was a spreadsheet that Mark sent out with Headland Amenity, which was the company he was with, which had GP, and it just had that one GP figure, which was the 18-degree optimum. So what I did was I adapted that spreadsheet. So I then called that UK GP, and then had a standard GP alongside it, so people could actually use either, what they felt was appropriate for them, their site, but they could also have a figure which was able to then have a conversation worldwide using the standard GP. So I think a lot of people still do use UK GP as the standard in the UK, but I just like people to have that understanding that it is adjusted from the normal GP. And I had a question recently. Someone was looking at growth ratio or GVX, and they couldn't work out why their calculations were different from what I was saying, and it took me a while to work out, and I realised he was using the UK GP, whereas the formula I'd put into the spreadsheet was using the standard GP, so we could be talking the international standard language. So it all gets very complicated very quickly if you start
Right.
going off piste.
Yes. So this is that's one of the reasons why I recommend just sticking with the standard when we start going outside of our own site. So for my I know a lot of people that will use an adjusted GP for their location. But if you want to compare with somebody in New Zealand or somebody in Florida or somebody, let's just say that the USGA happens to share clipping volume data from the US Open Golf Championship that's happening this week. If they did, and then you wanted to calculate the GVX, you would want to use some standard units and some standard equations in order to get something that's comparable. And once we start comparing outside of our own location, that's where we want to use the standard. So in the show notes, I'll put a direct link to a couple of other blog posts and podcasts that I've done where I've discussed this. I agree. It's when you start looking at fescues and Poa annua, they probably are reaching their optimum growth at 18 or maybe even a little bit less. So you could model it that way. But because we can never really figure this out exactly, this is just an approximation. So because I just say we're never going to figure out what the exact numbers are, but of course, every single species, whether it's ryegrass, whether it's creeping bent grass, whether it's brown top bent grass, whether it's Poa annua, whether it's kikuyu grass, whether it's cynodon, any of these grasses, their optimum temperatures are not going to match exactly the GP. Each species must have its own optimum temperature that is basically unknowable. I think the way that these particular experiments are conducted, the temperature that you would find would be sort of based on the way that you did the experiment. So if you would repeat the experiment with slightly different conditions, I expect you'd get a different optimum temperature. And that's why I think that it's impossible to figure this out. We could try to do this in a growth chamber, which is like a refrigerator. It's like a big refrigerator, but instead of cooling, it can also be heated, and then it has certain grow lights in it. But you could control the humidity, the lighting, the day length, and the temperature. And so I've had the idea that maybe I could rent some growth chamber space at some universities or research facilities, and we could try to figure out the optimum growth. And then the more that I think about it and figure out what does the real curve look like compared to this equation-based curve? And then I realized, you know what? it's almost impossible because that's so unrealistic compared to how grass actually grows in the real world that has wind speed and traffic going across it and intermittent shade from clouds and stuff like that. And so then, yeah, I've just kind of given up on saying I don't think we can ever really figure it out. So let's just stick with the classic equations. That's what I'm thinking.
Exactly. There's so many variables in the real world that you're not going to have in a growth chamber, like you say, is, what's the soil moisture levels, and how does the growth, you could go really deep into this and you probably wouldn't gain anything from it. How does the growth potential relate to growth when someone's applying 50 kilograms of nitrogen a year and someone applying 200 kilograms a year? It might be completely different, and at different levels of moisture, and like you say, with different levels of sunlight. And yeah, what's the benefit? Probably very little in the end. So yes, I'd can that project if I were you, Micah.
I've made notes about it. I've made notes about it 10 or 15 years ago, and then I've put it on the back burner or put it in the list of projects that I'm never going to bother doing. If somebody wants to do it, go for it. I'll follow your results with great interest. So there's a link to the Pace Turf Climate appraisal forms. So you should be able to go to this Pace Turf page. There's various Pace Turf pages that have links to download these climate appraisal forms. So if you want some that have the standard equations in them, you can find those. All right. Well, enough about growth potential. Let's go on to discuss the application of this with how things really work, which is the clipping volume. So it turns out that the way that I use the growth potential is I try to use the standard form because, well, let's consider like Washington, D.C. in the United States compared to London, England. I think that because we have much higher temperatures during the spring, summer, and autumn in Washington, D.C., I think that there's more potential for the grass to grow more rapidly than there is in London. So I think it makes sense to just use the same equation if we're going to use the growth potential equation. If we're predicting growth, I'm predicting that we get more growth in Washington, D.C. because the temperatures are going to be warmer. So I think creeping bentgrass, and I think Poa annua also, I think it's going to grow more at 20 than it will at 18.
Yeah, a lot of that will come down to the stress on the plant, won't it? I think Poa annua, if it's well fed and well watered and you get it to 20 degrees, it's going to grow.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the slowdown in growth in Poa comes from, I guess greenkeepers are trying to, a lot of the time, minimize the irrigation and try and force Poa out a little bit, and maybe try and get bent and fescue in, so Poa can get stressed very easily in those situations. So that's one of these variables that is not really, the growth potential is not going to relate to the growth because of all these things we're trying to manipulate the grass ourselves. So yeah,
And
I think growth potential is just dropping back on that one. And the 18 degrees in the UK GP, where that is useful is some of the work we've done with fungicide timings, and that's where I would definitely say for people in the UK, we've done some work on optimizing the timing of your fungicides and the intervals between applications. So getting away from a pure calendar reapply a fungicide at 21 days. I think it was Mark Hunt who came up with this idea originally, and I ran with it for a few years and did quite a bit of research on it. And we came up with the number of 9.5 UK GP was the time when that fungicide would probably not have the strength within the plant to resist high disease pressure, and that would be your reapplication interval rather than 21 days. And that's, all the research I've done on that and the trials I've done on that would suggest that's far more accurate than going by the calendar. But
and
if you were to take that 9.5 GP and turn that into standard GP, that makes an enormous difference. The application intervals go from I think we did a trial where we tested 9.5 UK GP intervals versus 9.5 standard GP intervals, and I wrote something down because I always forget this. Yeah, I think the first interval in October there was 12 days between the first and second applications on the UK GP, and the standard GP was 18 days. And in the standard GP plots, we started to get disease creeping in after sort of 14 days or so. So if you were to use the standard GP in that situation, you've let disease in. So we developed that model based on UK GP, and I would recommend greenkeepers in the UK would follow that. But that's purely for their site. But I wouldn't, you wouldn't want to throw that around the world.
Right. But yeah, so for that particular model that was calibrated based on a certain calculation, then you would stick with that same calculation.
Absolutely. Yes.
And is this only for microdocium, or is it for summer diseases also?
The only research we've done on it is for microdocium, because that is by far the biggest disease we have. And I think the climate in the UK now is so mild in the autumn that we're getting quite a bit of growth in sort of October and November, whereas it used to be, a lot cooler, and the intervals of 21 days were probably a lot more appropriate to that climate. But now we're getting some really warm days right into the end of October. So unfortunately, active ingredients probably aren't as strong as they used to be, and we have a limited amount in the UK compared to, well, the States in particular, who has an enormous list compared to what we have. We have something like 10 different products available.
So keep your potassium up, folks.
Well,
that's a joke. That's a joke.
For someone who works at a company that sells fungicides, please do.
Yeah. So yeah, that's an entirely different issue. But actually, for microdocium, if you put too much potassium, you actually are going to increase your risk of disease. So that's
right.
You want to apply balanced fertilizer.
This clip made into a GIF, and I'm going to put it on every social media for everybody who's bashed me for the last 10 years for saying exactly that.
So I guess 15 years ago, I thought about GP more than I think about it now. But I do use it all the time. I just don't think about it too much because I spent many years thinking about it. And I sometimes explain to people that how I use GP is to make predictions, looking into the future. For things that have not happened yet, I will use GP to predict how much the grass might grow, how much nitrogen the grass might use at a particular site. In fact, I just did a whole bunch of soil reports, and I was doing some climate analyses of the sites for the particular grass types and for the site temperatures, and I was predicting what the annual nitrogen rates may be for putting greens, for fairways, for these places. That's all looking into the future. But when I'm actually managing grass, I would throw that prediction away for budgeting purposes, for planning purposes, for scheduling, for rough scheduling purposes. I would use GP looking into the future. But in reality, I would throw the plan away. I would make the first application based on GP. Then I'd start measuring the clipping volume and observing how the grass is growing. And then I start adjusting in real time based on how the grass is actually growing. So it turns out that I make the decisions on a day-to-day basis, not based on growth potential, but based on clipping volume. Does that make sense to you? And do you find that that's the same way people in the UK, many of your customers, is that how they are managing also?
Yeah, I think clipping volume still isn't mainstream by any stretch of the imagination. It's still a bit niche, I guess. And not
Really?
everyone.
It's
I think it's growing. It's growing, but it's a slow grower.
give me the number. What percentage of the there's more than 1,000 courses in England, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
what's the
Uh,
what percentage of those 1,000 plus facilities are measuring clipping volume on a every time they mow basis?
I would hazard a guess it's probably not a lot higher than 5%.
5%.
Yeah, I could be wrong, but from what I see, a lot of people, if you ask someone why they're not doing it, they can come up with all sorts of reasons, but there really is only one reason, which is they can't be bothered. I guess they don't see the value in it. I think sometimes some people do start collecting clipping volume, and it isn't an instant, wow, look at that. Sometimes it can take, 6 months or a season before you can really start to see the full trends. But for a lot of people who do it and have stuck with it, you never go back, because you see how, it doesn't get more fundamental, I don't think, for someone who's a greenkeeper than how much is your grass growing. I've at BTME continued to learn for the last, I think, 8-10 years. Myself and my colleague Kelly, who I think you've met, have taught a class on how to build a fertilizer program for beginners, and you ask the question all the time: what are you trying to achieve? What do you want from your fertilizer application? It's, well, you want growth for recovery, and it's like, how much growth do you want? It's like, well, just the right amount. So how do you know what the right amount is? You measure it. It just seems so simple, and that everything we do is about making grass grow to a certain level, and to measure it just seems so simple and easy. But yeah, there's still a very small percentage of people who are doing it, I would say.
Yeah, that does not surprise me. I think if we look around the world, I often would use the 5-10% number, although it does seem to be increasing at higher end facilities. So I see a lot of well known places with big budgets. They're definitely doing it, but the people who are at a 1 or 2 person operation for the maintenance crew, they also see a tremendous value in it, and they probably are the ones that can even get the most benefit from it. Because if you're at a big budget place, in the UK, maybe that would be a Wentworth or a Belfry or a JCB kind of facility, a London Golf Club perhaps. So I think of those places. So they've got a lot of staff and a lot of machines. If your grass is growing too fast, what are you going to do? You go mow it again. It's easy. You just go do a double cut, and you still get the green speed, or maybe you go and put out a growth regulator application, or the next day you do a double cut, or you can do an afternoon mow. You have the machinery and the staff and the ability to go out and deal with the grass that's growing too fast. And if you are at a lower budget operation with fewer people, you can't easily go do a double cut.
No.
You don't have time and people to do that. So you
don't want to do work that you don't need to do.
Right.
So
and
why make the grass grow and then spend time cut? The way I always talk about it, and hopefully this hits home with people eventually, is let's talk through the process of over applying fertilizer. So the first thing you do is you have to phone up the sales rep and order some fertilizer. You're paying money for that fertilizer. Then you've got to pay one of your members of staff, or you've got to pay your own wages to apply that fertilizer. Then what you've got to do is spend time and money cutting and collecting, and throwing rid and getting rid of and disposing those clippings. And also, the more you put on, if you're over applying, you're building more thatch probably.
have
Then
a
you've got to
higher
spend.
sand requirement.
You've got to deal with that thatch, which would either be you've then got to holotine the greens, or you've got to scarify the greens, you've got to top dress the greens. And once you do that, what happens? Well, you've got all these holes and all these lines and sand everywhere. So what do? Well, you put some fertilizer on to kind of quick recovery. So you end up, the whole process is actually why, if you do over apply fertilizer, there are all these knock-on effects that you then have to deal with further down the line. So why not try and optimize it and get the right amount of fertilizer? That's how I like to explain it to people.
That's how I like to explain it to people too. But it does seem there's a
We
big
clearly don't
hurdle.
explain it very well, because no one does it.
Well, no, it's just it's the persuasion part. I think the explaining, people will sort of understand it, but they don't see the value where it would be worth it for them to do it. And people also seem to overestimate the difficulty. They overestimate the amount of time that would be involved. They overestimate the difficulty it is to obtain the right kind of bucket. They overestimate the difficulty in attaching the bucket to a mower. They overestimate the difficulty in having staff empty the clippings into a bucket and being able to read how many liters that is. And they overestimate the 30 seconds that it takes to put those data into a spreadsheet. And they underestimate the value that they get from it in terms of some places have cut their annual clippings in half. I like to measure the cumulative clippings through the course of a year, and then you can compare last year to this year. And we're talking about top clubs that have national or international level tournaments, and you would they think that their greens are great, and then they do clipping volume, and within 2 or 3 years they're collecting half as many clippings as they did before, and the greens are still great, but now they're putting less sand, they're producing faster and firmer surfaces, and they're more consistent through the year, and they're mowing less. So it's not that they're doing this to save money, but they're able to save time and effort and money and allocate those resources to other areas of the property. It's just a really efficient and nice way to manage.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we're probably preaching to the convert to each other here, aren't we? But I put a post out on Twitter a little while ago for any greenkeepers in the UK who are collecting clipping volume. Would you, have a conversation with me and share some of your data? And it was all very similar what they were doing. Those who've been doing it for a number of years, the clipping volume, the charts goes from sort of like this to like this as over the years come down. They're just producing less and less clipping volume, and just producing better greens. And it was, it was interesting. So there was one guy in the northwest who reduced the amount of money he was spending on his greens by X thousand pounds per annum, and he then reinvested that resource in a surfactant program for his fairways. So his fairways massively improved in consistency through a dry summer, but his greens also improved as well by managing them correctly and getting this consistency and smoothness, and without overproducing grass. So the benefit was, it wasn't just saving money and giving it back to the golf club. If you're a smart greenkeeper, you keep that money and you reinvest it on areas where you think you can improve your course. So it's not just about saving money on the greens. It's about making your budget stretch to the maximum, getting the most from the money you have to spend on your golf course. I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's you brought up an important point that probably the people that listen to this show are already doing all of this stuff. So how do we reach the 90% or 95% of people that don't do this or don't see the value? I'm not quite sure, but we just we can just keep talking, collecting good stories. And I hadn't heard that one before. I did not. I saw when you requested that people share some data with you. I didn't realize that you'd seen that consistent result, that even in the UK, people are, once they start doing this, they tend to get a lower clipping volume over time.
Yeah, and I think probably in answer to your earlier question of how many people are doing this, I had 7 people come back to me, I think it was, saying they're collecting clipping volume and they've done so for a period of time. So it wasn't exactly a large pool of data I gathered. But they were all getting similar results. And if I've seen some stuff from Chris Tridd about Hazeltine, and it's that trend of getting the clipping volume down, and getting the spend down and getting consistency and not having to do all these extra operations, that everybody seems to see the benefit from it once they dial in, their applications of fertilizer and get their mowing regimes right and all the rest of it. So there just seems to be this consistent benefit that people are seeing from doing this.
How about the GVX? So once you've got clipping volume and you've got growth potential, is anybody using the GVX that you're aware of?
Yeah, thanks for changing the name. Just after I wrote a leaflet which had growth ratio written all over it. So.
Yeah, when I am involved in coming up with these ideas, I realize that I have a duty to give them a good name. And I think with the GVX, we finally come up with a name that
You're
works.
going to settle
Well,
on this one now, are you?
I
'Cause it
think
was the
so.
Speedo, wasn't it, which was always a bit dodgy.
Well, the
And
speedo as a speedometer, it is a speedometer, but it just doesn't come across right. Certainly
well,
for
I mean,
Americans,
yeah, I know it comes across as someone in a pair of budgie smugglers, doesn't it?
it does. Yeah. So you can't talk about that with all the people at the club the way that you might like to. But the GVX has a technical.
Yes,
It
and
comes
I think
across as being like, wow, that
actually,
sounds fancy.
yeah, you actually hit on a very important point as well. I think is getting that professional image of the industry across to club management and administrators, because it's, I still think there's still very much, the average golfer or your golf club manager will think of a greenkeeper as, someone who cuts the grass. We always used to joke, you'd be called a head greenkeeper, but you just call yourself a head grass cutter, because that's what people think you do. And you always used to get the question, what do you do in winter? Because they think all you do is cut grass. So I think having that professional image, so you're not just saying, for example, I need to adjust my fertilizer, but we talk about getting your greens primed and peaking for a tournament. You're not just talking about, you well, I need to cut them a bit lower. You're saying, well, actually, my GVX rate is at this level, and I know I can achieve optimum. You just put that alongside things like your stim meter readings and your firmness and all these other things to get the greens to their peak performance, and then longer term things where you're looking at organic matter levels. Again, you use your GVX rating to say, I know my greens are performing at their absolute best when my GVX is at 50, 60, or whatever it may be. So I think it's a tool to, yes, useful tool for greenkeepers, but I think if we can start talking to club managers in this very professional, data-driven way, I think they're going to be much more receptive to ideas in the future if you're speaking in that fashion.
It's like the organic matter testing. If Because no golfers like coring and no golfers like sand covered greens, and yet that is sometimes required in order to manage the surface
Mm-hmm.
at the desired level. And I really like what I call OM246, and in the UK I think it's called organic matter testing, as a way to communicate that the work we're doing is effective or not effective, or that we need to do more of it. Because if I'm talking to a committee or to a general manager or to an owner and saying our organic matter is going up and up and up and up, and if it gets too high, the balls are going to start plugging when they hit the green, and the golfers, when they walk across the green, they're going to be sinking and leaving footprints, and the mower's going to sink in. If we don't manage this, then you can see that changing over time. Or you can see that it's staying the same, or you can see that it's going down as the work that you've done has been effective. And I think that organic matter testing is a great way to also communicate in a professional way about the work that we're doing that does involve getting our hands dirty, getting our feet dirty, going out and working in all kinds of weather, doing the kind of grass cutting or sand spreading kind of work, but it's actually very technical in order to produce the type of results that we need. And
Yeah.
the GVX is a way to look at what's happening above ground. Clipping volume is a way to look at what's happening above ground. And the organic matter testing is a way to look at what's happening below ground.
Yeah, and I think they'll also be a lot more receptive to your ideas if one you would say, do you know what, our organic matter levels have come down in the top 20 mil. So this year I don't need to do a holocore. I don't need to do this big, disruptive work. And if you're saying, actually, no, we've been following the data and we're at this level, we're happy with it. I think that goes a long way, rather than just every year, oh, well, it's the end of September, let's get the holocores out. We're going to do our autumn renovations. There's got to be, if you've got a reason to do it and a reason not to do it, I think that comes across as a much more professional approach. Yeah, yes, it's right for yourself, but it's your perception as well is going to be that much better, I think.
What percentage of clubs would you say are doing the organic matter testing on an annual basis?
I would say quite a high percentage.
More than
Um,
50?
I would say probably more than 50. I mean, a lot of companies when they do a soil test, they might do your annual soil test, which it would have like organic matter in it, but they wouldn't be done in an OM246 way. And I used to do that sometimes you go to a customer and you'd show them their soil test results, and it would say organic matter 4%, and I'd just say just ignore that. That doesn't mean anything because it's just a measurement over the full depth of the core, which could, 1 year you could have put on a bit of weight and you're leaning on the core a bit more, and you've got a much deeper core you're taking out. So if you're doing it OM246, then you've got the precise measurement. I would say a lot more people are doing that now because they can see the value in it, and it's something I know I was doing as a greenkeeper, and I finished greenkeeping in 2000. When was it? 14, so a good 10, 11 years ago, and that was a standard thing I was doing then. So I think it's been around that much longer, and people are accepting of it as the standard way of doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, because I didn't really start promoting clipping volume until 2014. So it seems like a long time, but that's only 11 years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's not not a huge amount of time. Well, what about disease prediction models? I sometimes, well, I do follow Mark Hunt's weather blog, and I'm going to invite him on the show at some point, and we'll talk about this. But I sometimes see him refer to some microdocium models, but I don't know what it's based on, and and then I see him also talk about the Smith Kearns model, which I know what that's based on. And I know you mentioned earlier that you have fewer active ingredients or perhaps some restrictions on the total amount of pesticides that can be used. So it would seem to me that for disease management in the UK, not only is it really important to have grass that's growing at the right rate, grass that doesn't have too much thatch, grass that is really at an appropriate GVX or an appropriate clipping volume for the time of year, but also that you understand what your particular disease risk is at that time. Have you done some work with disease models, and do you have any information for me about those?
Yeah, we basically picked up on some work that Mark Hunt started. So he came up with some ideas around a microdocium prediction model using it was basically taking weather station data and taking the data that was basically at the standard weather station, like 6 feet, and then how does that relate to what the data is going to be, if you like, how the humidity level is going to be at ground level, where obviously it actually counts. So he came up with a rough model, and it was based around things like temperature, humidity, wind speed, that sort of thing, and all the various, and giving all these factors different weightings to go into the formula. And then we played around with that and changed a little bit, tweaked it here and there to try and get it more and more accurate. This model has been out with, I think, probably 50 sites around the country for the past 2 years, just testing it, making sure it's accurate. It's still not 100% spot on, but I think it's a lot better than anything else I've seen at the moment. So that again is something that needs to be incorporated into your application interval. So I spoke about the 9.5 UK GP earlier. Well, that's great. It does, just because you've sprayed on, let's say, the 1st of October, you hit your 9.5 UK GP on the 15th of October. What you don't want to do is then spray a fungicide when it's, the wind's blowing and the sun's out and there's absolutely no humidity whatsoever. You need to correlate a bit like you will with Smith Kearns. When the pressure is high, um, that's the time to get your interval, your spray down. So you want to get ahead of the disease. So yeah, well, I mean, we've been working on that for a number of years now, and I say that was a Mark Hunt kicked it off. I basically took the ball and ran with it for a little while. Um, where that is going to be in terms of general availability, I don't have an answer for you right now.
So is that a proprietary model at the moment?
Yes, yes. So we're going to charge everybody for it.
Hmm.
I don't know. I
That's a
honestly don't know
pity.
what the plans. Yes, I know, but that's the world. I, I I genuinely don't know what the plan is for that model. But I mean, the work has been done. It's definitely a lot more accurate than anything else. So hopefully, it will become freely available because I think it's a really useful tool.
Yeah, I think there seems to be a lot of opportunities to do better prediction of disease. And you see, to me, the Smith Kearns model is a little bit crude, uh, but it works pretty well and people are pretty happy with it. But I look at things like that and say that is just for one disease. And it's a little bit crude in that it's only well, it has a hard limit at the that I won't go into too much detail, but you can go from like 100% risk uh, at 34.9 degrees Celsius to 0 degrees risk at 35 degrees Celsius, something like that, which makes
Mm.
no sense in the real world. And that's what I mean by crude is that it doesn't have very gentle finishing points as the risk goes down at some extreme temperatures. That just makes me question whether it could be improved to cover a little bit wider range of conditions. And so it seems like there's so many diseases that could be predicted a little bit better,
Mm.
but there's just not a huge amount of research going into that. So
No, I mean it can be very affected by local microclimates as well, can't it? I mean, you can have. We all know golf courses where there are certain greens that get disease and certain greens that don't, and it's not, it's weird. Sometimes it's not always, the green that's on top of the hill with no trees around it and gets lots of wind is not always the one that has less disease. Where the ones in the in a valley with trees around it and it sits wet, it's sometimes there are weird factors at play that I don't think we fully understand yet. So disease models are useful, but you have to use your local knowledge on top of them as well, don't you?
now you used to have a research facility or Origin Amenity ran a research facility for turfgrass, and
Hmm.
you said that has closed down a year ago, or something
Yeah,
like that.
it's been mothballed, which I must admit I was very sad about that because it was we were doing I thought some really useful work there, but um, commercially I guess I don't think they felt they weren't getting the return from it. But hopefully that will be back up and running at some point in the future because it's a really nice facility. You've got a USGA green there and then a sports turf area next to it. So yeah, I hopefully that gets up and running again one day. I mean, I guess I was quite keen that it was used not just for product development, but we could do some good work that would benefit the whole industry. Um, and I think sometimes perhaps there was a misunderstanding from. I've got to be careful how I say this, not talking myself into trouble. Misunderstanding is what you are likely to get from a research program. I think it was almost like, well, I start a trial, and then 6 weeks later, I've got this amazing data, and we're releasing a fantastic product that changes the whole industry. And then I start another one, and 6 weeks later, you have another amazing product which changes the industry. It doesn't quite work like that.
Yeah, maybe if you do that 100 times, you might get three of those, something like that.
Yeah, and ultimately it had been running for 2.5 years, so it really just got started. And there was
Hmm.
some good things that I was, I'm very proud of some of the work we did there, and I hope, I've spoken to greenkeepers who've said they've listened to what I've said and looked at some of the research we did, and that's really helped them. So that's reward enough for me. Um, Maybe monetary reward was probably a bit more what the company was looking for at the time.
Well, I've somewhat of a similar experience, although I've not really been in product sales, but I do need to make more money than I spend. And ATC, my company, had a research facility in Thailand for a few years, and I I know well how that was a money loser. So eventually I closed my research facility also. So I can still do a lot of research, but it's a lot easier to say have golf course superintendents collect clipping volume data and send me a spreadsheet than it is for me to run the
Yes,
research facility myself.
yes, it is an expensive endeavor. So, yeah, I enjoyed it while it lasted. Anyway, I I learned a hell of a lot doing it. So, hopefully, it'll get back online again one day.
Well, uh, that is understandable. And I've certainly enjoyed very much talking with you. I think we've covered all these topics pretty well, Geoff. So maybe when the percentage of people measuring clipping volume goes up to 10 or 15%, we can check in again and see how that trajectory is going and see what kind of results people are getting.
Yeah, we'll get there one day, Micah. We'll keep banging the drum. Someone will
All right.
listen.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me on the ATC Double Cut today. I'll put a link to that growth potential post that we talked about, and I will put a link to some other relevant posts on these kind of topics. I'll put all of that in the show notes. So thanks, Geoff Fenn, for joining me, and I will promise to be back again soon with more interesting turfgrass information. From southern Thailand for ATC, I'm Michael Woods. Bye bye.